The war lasted 11 years. The Bret Collective did not introduce themselves. Before they started burning, they came from the outer darkness, from the unexplored space beyond the edge of the galaxy, where no empire or alliance had bothered to send a probe. The first thing they did when they discovered the Galactic Empire was to destroy an outer station called Relay 740. Without warning, without communication, without explanation. Just fire from their weapons, then silence, and then nothing where the station had once been. That was 11 years ago. Since then, the Bret Collective had captured 140 star systems. They burned planets. They killed billions. They fought against the combined military might of 46 species and retreated, and retreated again, never once slowing their pace. Their ships were unlike anything in the Empire's catalogs. Their weapons pierced energy shields that were supposed to be impenetrable. Their hyperspatial drives allowed them to appear, fire, and vanish before a targeting system could even lock onto a signature. Every time the Empire found an answer to one Bret tactic, the Brets changed tactics. Every time a defense held for a week, the Brets found a new angle of attack. The Empire's military analysts had a word for what the Bret Collective was doing. They used it quietly, in private reports, in rooms where there were no civilians. That word was extinction. The Galactic Empire was 3,000 years old. It had survived internal wars, plagues, economic collapses, and interspecies hatreds that took centuries of cooling to turn into treaties. It had never survived something you could not negotiate with, something you could not outlast, something in which you could not find a weakness. After 11 years, it wasn't handling it very well. Commander Sarah Voss sat in the massive war room on Verret Prime for 4 days straight. She had fallen asleep in her chair twice. She ate whatever the Zarathian staff brought her, nutritious in the way military rations are nutritious. Technically correct, entirely joyless. She drank a lot of coffee surrogate, which the Zarathians served in tall silver pitchers, and which tasted like the smell of a burnt tire but contained enough caffeine to keep a human conscious. So, she drank it. The war room was vast. It had to be. 46 species meant 46 delegations, each with its own physique, its own atmospheric preferences, its own cultural requirements for how to sit during serious discussion. Some species sat, some stood. The Helter delegates hovered 2 feet off the floor for reasons Voss never fully understood. The Garen representative, a being named Deepstone, occupied a portion of the floor the size of a small apartment. The room was built to accommodate all of them, which meant it accommodated no one perfectly. The air was maintained at a compromised temperature too cold for the bird-like Pilari, too warm for the Garens, and the lighting attempted to adapt to 17 different visual spectra, mostly failing. In the center of the room, on a slow, steady axis, spun a holographic map of the known galaxy. Imperial territory glowed blue. The Bret advancement burned red. There was much more red than there had been 5 years ago. Admiral Creek stood at the edge of the map. He was a Zarathian, tall, silvery, with 4 arms and a voice that carried effortlessly across the chamber. He pointed to a dense cluster of red light that sat on the edge of blue territory like a bruise. 8,000 ships, Crick said. He spoke it the same way he had for the last 3 days, as if more frequent repetition could give that number a meaning other than what it meant. 8,000 confirmed Bret ships in a dense formation, moving at standard advancement speed. At their current pace, they will reach Kalos in 18 standard days. The room reacted the same way it had for the last 3 days, loudly and in several directions at once. Kalos was not just a planet. It was the second largest population center of the Empire. 9 billion people, a mixed set of species, molded over 4 centuries into one of the most developed worlds in known space. It was also the home of the Empire's primary shipbuilding complex, where approximately 40% of all new warships were built or modernized. The loss of Kalos would mean more than just catastrophe for the 9 billion living there. It would undermine the Empire's ability to fight for the next 10 years. After that, the math did not provide a good outcome. The Pilari ambassador stood. Her name was Soya. She was small and bird-like, with iridescent blue-green feathers that turned flat gray when she was upset. Right now, they were very flat. "We must direct the entire fleet to the defense of Kalos," she said. "Everything we have. We will make our stand there. If we concentrate the entire fleet on Kalos, the western approach corridor will be wide open," said Deepstone. The Garen representative's voice was low and grinding, like two large stones being moved against each other. When the Garens went quiet, Voss had learned. It meant they were scared. Deepstone was not going quiet. Deepstone was calculating aloud, which, Voss had learned, meant the Garens had moved past the stage of fear into a cold space where they simply started counting things. The Brets have used this pattern 4 times, Deepstone said. They apply pressure to one high-value target. When we concentrate the response, a second force appears in an undefended place. The Eastern Helter systems will be at risk. The Eastern Helter systems have a combined population of 400 million, said the lead Helter delegate, whose bioluminescent skin shimmered in patterns Voss recognized as a sign of agitation. There are 9 billion on Kalos. And if Kalos falls, the Eastern systems fall within 6 months. The numbers are there. Numbers, numbers, numbers. These are people, said Deepstone. Numbers are people, Soya snapped. The argument continued. Voss drank her coffee and did not participate. That was the plan. She and Chen had agreed before the start of this session not to speak until Chen was ready. Everything before that was noise, important noise, perhaps, but noise. Ambassador Theo Chen sat next to Voss with a small tablet in his hand. He had been looking at the same page of the tablet for most of the last day. He wasn't really reading it. He was waiting, and reading was the way he made the waiting meaningful. Chen was 52, not old by human standards, but old for a field assignment. He had been the senior human diplomatic representative to the Imperial Council for 6 years. Most of those 6 years, he had watched 46 species panic in 46 different ways, and he had learned that the panic always followed the same pattern. They argued loudest about the last possible option, the one they feared most. And that was how you knew the conversation was almost over. The conversation is almost over. Voss leaned toward him. There will be a vote on full fleet commitment in an hour, she said quietly. If it passes, we lose our window. It won't pass, Chen said. He turned the page on the tablet without reading it. Deepstone's coalition will block it. They will argue for 2 more days, and then they will ask us. Are you sure? He looked at her over the tablet. I've been watching these people for 6 years. I'm sure. He turned out to be right. 2 hours after the vote on full fleet commitment failed by a margin of 11 species against 35, and after the Hall had gone through 3 other proposed strategies, all of which had obvious problems that everyone pointed out simultaneously, Chancellor Vin, old with white scales and patient, at the head of the room, turned to the back corner. Ambassador Chen, you have been very quiet, Vin said. Chen put down the tablet. He stood. He walked to the center of the hall, and the 46 species watched as the middle-aged diplomat stopped next to the holographic map and looked at the red cluster on it. We would like to request 12 days, he said. The hall went silent. 12 days? Crick repeated. He wasn't mocking. He was genuinely confused, which on a Zarathian face looked like deep suspicion. Ambassador, the Brets will reach Kalos in 18 days if we don't start redeployment now. If nothing happens within 12 days, redeployment will begin on the 13th day. You still have 6 days from that point. My analysts tell me that is enough for a basic defensive formation, Chen said. Basic, repeated Soya. The word flew out like a word spoken when someone is horrified but has no other word. It is not perfect, Chen agreed. But you lose nothing by waiting 12 days. The option is still there. 12 days? To do what? Asked Deepstone. Chen looked at the red cluster, at the 8,000 ships moving slowly and surely toward 9 billion lives. We would prefer to explain later, he said. If it works, the explanation will be clearer. If it doesn't work, the redeployment plan will proceed, and we won't have wasted your time explaining what failed. Chancellor Vin looked at him for a long time with those 300-year-old eyes. And what do you need from us in these 12 days? Nothing, Chen said. Do not move your ships. Do not send any fleet units into the approach corridor. That is all. You are asking the Empire, Soya said, each word a small separate weight, to hold its most critical strategic decision for 12 days, based on nothing. I am asking the Empire to trust us for 12 days, Chen said. He said it simply, without any pathos. I know it is not a small thing to ask. The vote passed narrowly, 29 against 17, with the Garen bloc being the deciding vote. Deepstone argued in his low, grinding voice that 12 days was worth nothing if the condition was that redeployment would continue in any case on the 13th day. The math was clean. 29 species agreed with the math. Voss walked with Chen through the long corridors of the building. Zarathian architecture was built to impress high vaulted ceilings, stone walls with centuries of compressed weight, corridors that stretched longer than was strictly necessary because the Zarathians believed important conversations happened in the space between destinations. Voss had begun to believe it too. After 6 years. Harrow in position? She asked. Confirmed 8 hours ago, Chen said. All 3 units in the corridor. The projectors are charged and distributed. He is waiting for the signal, and the Brets haven't detected anything. Harrow's ships are idling. No engines, no active systems, drifting on pre-calculated trajectories. Chen paused. The Brets don't scan for what isn't working. They've never had to. Voss thought about it. About hundreds of human ships, dark and cold and completely silent, drifting in the void on nothing but math and preset courses, carrying a load that would not appear on any sensor scan. She had read the project files. Everything, even those she technically didn't have access to, which he showed her because she needed to know. She had read them in one long sitting 3 months ago, and then sat for a long time in a very quiet room. What humanity had built was not a weapon in any conventional sense of the word. It was something like a key, opening a door into a place where there shouldn't be a door. When this ends, she said, the conversation with the council will be difficult, Chen said. Very. Some of them will be angry. He paused. Some of them will be afraid. He looked out the window at the end of the corridor, where the sky of Virat Prime was turning into an evening green. 3 moons were just beginning to rise. We knew this when we started the project. It is still the right choice. Because of Kalos. Because of the 140 systems, he said. Because of the 11 years. Because of what will happen if the Brets reach the core worlds and there is nothing to stop them. He looked at her. We have one tool that no one else has. Refusing to use it because some people will feel discomfort afterward? That is a choice I cannot make. Voss looked at the sky green turning to violet on the horizon. 3 moons, the beautiful planet that had served as the headquarters of the War Council for 5 years. She thought of General Harrow there in the darkness. She had never met him. She had seen his file. 47 years old, a career officer, an obsessive reader of physics journals. The type of person who took a problem home at night and woke up at 3:00 a.m. with the solution and immediately checked the math before allowing himself to be happy. He had spent 7 years on this project. 7 years of work that most people in this building didn't know about. In 12 days, everyone would know. She thought about how it would be. She thought about the 46 species turning to look at the humans in the back corner. She thought about the 9 billion people on Kalos who would be okay. 12 days, she said. 12 days, Chen agreed. Outside, the moons moved. The sky darkened. Somewhere in the space between the stars, cold and invisible and silent, the clock ticked down to 12. The 12th day. The meeting hall was full before the first bell. No one had asked to arrive early. No one had sent messages asking for delegations at dawn. They came anyway, because 12 days had passed, and every species in the Empire had its own way of counting time, and they were all counting. The hall filled in the gray pre-dawn hours of Virat Prime. Delegates took their seats in the semi-darkness while staff scrambled to prepare the coffee service, the holographic map, and the 46 atmospheric adjustment panels that kept the air breathable for 46 different sets of lungs. Voss arrived at the 4th hour of the morning and found Soya already in her place. Deepstone was already in his corner. Crick stood at the edge of the map platform, arms crossed, staring at the red cluster on the rotating display as if looking long enough could change something. So far, nothing had happened. The red cluster was still there. 8,000 Bret ships continued to move. Still on schedule, now 9 days from Kalos instead of 18. Voss took her seat. Chen arrived 10 minutes later with 2 cups of terrible coffee. He gave one to Voss without asking. What time? Asked Voss. He said he would send the signal at the 6th hour, when the Bret fleet is in its peak formation, Chen said. They compress the formation when they are between transition points. Harrow has been watching the pattern for 2 weeks. The 6th hour is when they are closest to each other. Voss drank her coffee. The taste was the same as always. She drank it anyway. He conducted the final check of the projectors. The final check was an hour ago. All 314 are active and holding position. She had read that number in the project files. 314 devices, each no larger than a standard shipping container. each drifting silent and cold in the dark space around the Bret fleet, placed over the last 12 days by ships running on idle and invisible on pre-calculated courses. 314 anchors driven around 8,000 warships by humans who never considered that it might be impossible. That was the human way, she thought, to do it, then check if it was possible. If even a part of them, she began. Harrow would know, said Chen. He calculated the coverage math 100 times. Any activation below 80% and the effect will be incomplete. He won't send the signal unless he has full confidence in the distribution. And he has full confidence. Chen looked at the clock on the wall. He has full confidence. They waited. The 6th hour arrived. The hall was now completely full, and the low noise of 46 species in quiet collective anxiety filled the air like weather fills a room. All-encompassing, aimless. Something you felt in your bones rather than heard with your ears. Crick didn't move from the map platform. Vin sat at the head of the hall with the stillness of a very old person who had learned that some things could not be hurried. At 6 hours and 7 minutes, nothing had changed. The red cluster was still moving. The math was still working. 9 days to Kalos. At 6 hours and 11 minutes, Crick turned to the human part of the room. "Ambassador Chen," he said, "the 6th hour has passed." We agreed. And then the sensor board operator in the back of the room made a sound. It wasn't a professional sound. It was the sound a person makes when they see something their brain refuses to process. In an orderly way, a short, high sound that was immediately swallowed by a silence that was louder than the sound itself. Every head turned. The sensor operator was a young Zarathian technician whose silvery scales had gone a few shades paler than usual. She was staring at her board. She was staring at her board the way you look at something when you aren't sure if you see it or are imagining it. "Lieutenant Crick," he said, his voice very controlled. "Report on the Bret formation." The technician said it. She looked up from the board. She looked around the room as if hoping someone else would confirm what she was seeing. "Sir, it's not." "Speak clearly," Vin said from the head of the hall. "The formation has vanished." The technician said it. The room was quiet for a second. 2 seconds. Then it stopped being quiet. "Run a diagnostic," Crick said immediately, already moving toward the sensor station. "It's a malfunction. Run a full diagnostic." "I did," said the technician. She showed him her board. It ran automatically when the contacts vanished. "All systems are functioning normally. The sensors are working, sir. It's just, there's nothing there." "Nothing," Crick repeated. "No ships, no energy signatures, no residual engine emissions, no thermal trail from weapon discharge, no signs of debris, no radiation spike, no signs that 8,000 ships were destroyed or damaged or hit by anything. They were there, and then they were gone. The sensors show empty space." Crick stared at the board. Then he turned to the hall. "Secondary sensor grid," he said. "Give me readings from the Ort long-range station and the outpost on the Pelori border." People started moving. People started talking. Within 2 minutes, all available sensor channels were fed onto the main display. Channels from stations and outposts and patrol ships across a dozen systems were all looking at the same patch of space. They all showed the same thing: empty space where 8,000 warships had been. No pattern of explosion, no debris, no cloud of wreckage, no radiation signature indicating any weapon, no gravitational anomaly from a mass destruction of that scale. No residual electromagnetic pulse, no light echo from explosions, because there had been no explosions. The noise in the hall was extraordinary. 46 species simultaneously gripped by collective horror. It was not the sound Voss had expected to hear, and one she would never forget. Some species screamed. The Polari let out a high-frequency distress signal that cut through the noise like a blade. Some species went completely silent. The Garen block froze all 6 representatives like statues. And on Deepstone's face was an expression Voss had never seen on a Garan, an expression she couldn't name. Some species began to pray. Soya pressed her feathers tight to her body, which was a stress response for a Polarian so extreme that it was apparently involuntary. She gripped the edge of her desk. Her 3 pairs of eyes were open to their maximum diameter, shifting rapidly across her sensory spectrum. "What did it?" she said. Not to anyone specifically, and to everyone in general. "What did it?" Vin didn't move. The Chancellor sat at the head of the hall with those ancient 300-year-old eyes fixed on the empty spot on the display where the 8,000 Bret ships used to be. The face with white scales expressed nothing, but Vin's eyes slowly slid across the room. They stopped on Chen. Chen sat in his chair, Voss sitting next to him. They were not celebrating. They were not smirking or nudging each other, and they were not doing anything that humans do when something they had hoped for worked. They sat quietly and watched the room, and their faces were calm. Calm, that was how it differed from everything else in the room. 46 species were screaming, praying, and running sensor diagnostics. 2 humans sat in the back corner quietly and calmly. Vin saw it. Crick saw it. Soya saw it. The massive head of Deepstone slowly turned to the human corner. Deepstone stared at Chen for a long time. Then, in his low, grinding voice, not addressing anyone in particular, "The humans are not surprised." It took the room a few seconds to process this statement. Then, one by one, 46 species stopped doing what they were doing and looked at the back corner. Voss didn't fidget. She knew this moment would come. She had rehearsed what expression her face should have at this moment. Still neutral, present, not guilty because there was nothing to feel guilty about, not triumphant because this was not the time for it. Just present. Just a human woman sitting in a chair while 46 alien species simultaneously realized that the humans knew. Crick crossed the hall with long strides. He stopped in front of Chen's chair. The Admiral was 4 feet taller than Chen and had 4 arms, and he was racked by a sort of controlled fury that Voss recognized as a Zarathian's way of being terrified. "You knew," Crick said. His voice was very quiet, very controlled. "You asked us for 12 days. You asked us to trust you, and you knew." "Yes," Chen said. The single word fell into the room like a thrown stone. "What did you do?" said Crick. Chen met the Admiral's gaze. He didn't look away and didn't look small. "I gave you a promise when I asked for 12 days, he said. "I promised a full report. I am ready to give it now." "You will give it now," said Crick. "Yes," Chen said. "I will." He stood. He looked at Chancellor Vin. "With the Chancellor's permission, I would like to request a closed session, limited to senior military and diplomatic personnel. What I am going to explain involves information we would prefer not to broadcast over open channels." Vin looked at him for a long time. "This 300-year-old observation," Vin said. "You have enough." While the staff cleared the room to senior personnel and the door seals activated, Voss stood at the window and looked at the sky. Virat Prime was already in its morning. The green sky was bright and clear. Somewhere out there, 9 days away, was a patch of space that used to hold 8,000 warships, and now held nothing. Somewhere out there, General Harrow's ships were turning their engines back on, emerging from their cold silence, starting the long journey back. She imagined the signal reaching them. The deactivation signal that had already passed. The confirmation signal. The one that said it worked. She thought about how it felt on Harrow's ship at the moment the sensors showed empty space, and the math turned out to be correct. She thought about 7 years of work, 7 years of mystery and failure and trying again. Everything boiled down to one signal sent into the darkness. She thought about the 9 billion people on Kalos who would wake up today, not knowing what nearly happened to them. The door sealed behind the last admitted delegate. There were 23 people left in the hall and 46 empty chairs. Crick stood in the center of the map, where the holographic display still showed the empty space with clinical precision. Soya sat, her feathers slowly smoothing out. Deepstone was still in the corner, still with that expression Voss couldn't name. Chen walked to the center of the hall. He looked at the 23 senior representatives of the Galactic Empire. 7 years ago, he said. The room was very, very quiet. "We started building something. I will tell you what it is." Before Chen could say another word, Crick raised one of his 4 arms. "First," the Admiral said, "I want a scout team to go to that location." Chen nodded. "That is reasonable." "It is not a request," Crick said. His voice had the flatness of a man holding himself together by sheer will. "I am not asking for your permission, Ambassador. I am telling you what happens next. 3 fast scout ships. Independent sensor grids, full recording packets. I need eyes on that site before I sit down and listen to everything you are about to tell me." Chen nodded again. "Send them." The scouts launched within an hour. 3 fast Zarathian ships, the kind built for speed and sensor range above all else. No heavy weapons, reinforced sensor grids, hulls that could read the geological history of a cold world from a distance of 6 light minutes. They burned to the last registered position of the Bret fleet and arrived in 4 hours and 20 minutes. The hall waited. Voss spent the 4 hours and 20 minutes doing what she always did when she was waiting for something she couldn't control. She found a quiet corner, sat in it, and ran the project files through her head, not reviewing them for new information. She had already learned the files by heart, by this point, just walking through them like you walk through a well-known room, touching the walls, making sure everything was still in its place. 7 years, 218 scientists and engineers, 17 failed prototypes, one breakthrough that at first looked like just another failure. The breakthrough came with the debris of a Bret ship. On the 4th year of the war, an Imperial patrol discovered a drifting, cold, and dead Bret ship in the Sarin system, damaged in a previous clash. The crew was gone. The systems were shut down. It was the most complete Bret wreckage that had ever fallen into their hands. The Empire dismantled it very carefully and distributed the findings among all the Alliance's research teams. Most teams focused on the weapon systems in the hull assembly or energy shields. Those were the obvious priorities. Those were the things that killed Imperial soldiers. The human team took the engine. Specifically, a physicist named Dr. Rina Aku spent 8 months studying the Bret hyperspatial drive and asking a question no one else was asking. Where exactly do the ships go when they fold? The standard answer was that they folded through a compression of local space-time and appeared somewhere else. That was how hyperspatial travel worked in all known implementations. You entered. The space between where you were and where you wanted to be became very small for a very short time, and then you were there. Aku's question was more specific. She wanted to know what happened to the specific bubble of space-time that the ship occupied during the fold. Where did it go? What happened to the zero-point energy in that space? The Bret engine was more powerful than any hyperspatial engine the Empire had ever built. It folded faster, harder, over longer distances, which meant it did something more aggressive to local space-time than any known engine. The answer she found after 8 months was that the Bret engine didn't just compress local space-time. It cut it, a very small, very controlled cut along certain quantum boundaries, which healed a microsecond after the ship passed through. The backfiring powered the exit. The released energy pushed the ship out the other side. Aku looked at this mechanism for a long time. Then she asked a second question. What if you triggered the cut and prevented the backfiring? The scouts reached the last registered position of the Bret fleet in 4 hours and 18 minutes. The first sensor feed entered the hall. 2 minutes later, the display updated. The room became so quiet that Voss could hear the ventilation system working. Empty space. The scouts' scanners were running at maximum sensitivity. They could have detected a rock the size of a briefcase at that distance. They scanned for energy signatures, mass particles, frozen atmosphere, carbon traces, biological matter, metal fragments, engine residues, weapon residues, any trace of anything. They scanned for the specific spectral signatures of Bret composition that the Empire had catalogued over 11 years of clashes. They scanned for a thermal trail from structural collapse. They scanned for a gravitational echo from mass displacement. The sensors detected nothing. Not a single fragment, not a single particle, not a single atom from 8,000 warships and their crews. The space where the Bret fleet had been was not empty, as space is empty after a battle, where debris drifts and the fuel plasma of engines slowly cools for weeks. It was empty like a clean room, like a place where nothing had ever been. Nothing, said the sensor operator. Her voice had the quality of a person reading a report they didn't want to read. No debris field, no organic matter, no metal alloy signatures corresponding to Bret composition, no electromagnetic residues, no thermal trail. Background radiation in the area is perfectly normal. It corresponds to the expected baseline level for untouched open space in this sector. She paused, as if the fleet had never been there. Crick stood at the display for a long time. His 4 arms hung by his sides, which was unusual for him. Crick was a man who used his arms when he spoke, when he thought, when he just stood. 4 arms at rest meant that something had knocked him out of motion. "This can't be," he said. "It is physically impossible. 8,000 ships cannot cease to exist without leaving traces." He stopped. He looked at the readings. He looked at them for a long time. "Not even a temperature differential," he said. "No thermal signature. When matter is destroyed, it leaves heat energy as conserved. You cannot destroy 8,000 ships and not have a temperature differential in the surrounding space." He turned. Whatever took them didn't destroy them. Destruction would have left heat. The room absorbed it. Soya spoke first. Her feathers returned to an involuntary flat position. "Then where are they?" No one answered. The theories started within the hour. The Helter delegates requested an emergency private meeting with their science team. They returned in 40 minutes with an expression Voss associated with people who had just had a religious belief confirmed that they didn't entirely agree with. The lead Helter delegate, a tall bioluminescent being named Memory Vessel, addressed the hall with a voice cautious and slow. "In our oldest writings," said Memory Vessel, "there is a figure, a presence that exists between the stars. We have always understood this as a metaphor, a way to describe the unknown, a placeholder for what we didn't yet understand about the universe." The bioluminescent patterns on the Helter's skin shimmered with something Voss had never seen before. "What our science team tells us is that what happened in this space is consistent with a local collapse of the quantum vacuum, which, as our oldest theological texts describe, is the mechanism by which the between removes things from the physical world." Memory Vessel paused. "We do not claim this as a theological statement. We are reporting the findings of our science team alongside the context in which our culture has historically interpreted such events." 3 other delegations started talking at once. The Polari had their own version of this, not called the between, but something that roughly translated to folding behind the fold, an ancient concept from early Polari astronomy when they didn't yet understand what lay beyond the observable cosmos. The Gorans had a geological metaphor for it, the place where a stone goes when it stops being a stone. Several smaller species had similar concepts, all variations of the same theme, a place adjacent to the physical universe, which some ancient traditions said was where things went when the universe decided it didn't need them anymore. Deepstone hadn't spoken this whole time. Deepstone sat in the Garan corner and was very quiet, looking at Chen. Voss watched as the theories piled up. She watched the 46 species switch between scientific and spiritual frameworks and their combinations. Everyone was trying to cram something for which there was no frame into their existing catalogs. She watched them become louder and more insistent as the realization sank in not just that the Bret fleet was gone, but that, presumably, whatever took it could take others, could take anyone, could take them. The fear in the hall was of a different quality than the fear of losing a battle. The fear of battle contained an enemy. It had a direction, something to fight against or run from. This fear was the kind that had no direction, because its cause was invisible, unidentifiable, nothing to point at and name. "The exception," Deepstone said. The low, grinding voice cut through the noise like a deep sound cuts through high ones. "The humans are still calm." The room went silent again. All eyes turned to the back corner, to Voss sitting upright, to Chen standing at the edge of the map platform, watching the hall with the patient expression of a man waiting for the right moment. "They were calm when the fleet vanished," Deepstone continued. The Garan's voice contained no accusation, only precision. "They are calm now. They were calm when the scouts found nothing. They didn't propose theories. They didn't join our discussions." The massive head tilted. "They know what the empty space means. They knew before the scouts went. They knew before the fleet vanished. I think they knew before the start of the 12th day." Now every look in the hall was directed at Chen. Soya stood. There was sharpness in her voice. "Ambassador Chen, 12 days ago you stood in this hall and asked us to trust you. You asked us to give you 12 days. You gave us no information, and now 8,000 ships have vanished. Our scouts find empty space. Our science teams have no explanations, and you stand there with the expression of a man who is not confused. I ask you directly, what do you know about what happened?" Chen looked at her. Then he looked at Deepstone. Then he looked at Vin. "I know everything about what happened," he said. The room was deathly quiet. "I know what happened because we did it." The noise that followed was unlike anything Voss had heard in 6 years of council meetings. She expected noise. She had prepared for noise. Chen had prepared for noise. They had discussed this moment dozens of times, thought through every reaction, prepared for the anger and the fear and that particular kind of rage that arises when a trusted party reveals they held back information they weren't fully prepared for. It was the texture of it, how it struck the hall simultaneously, all 46 species as a physical event. Some species screamed, some went quiet, some started talking very fast in their own languages, not in imperial standard, the kind of switching that happened when someone was too overwhelmed to maintain a second language. The bioluminescent patterns of the Helter delegates turned white, which was the equivalent of paleness from shock among Helters. Crick's 4 arms went up. All of them. He stepped toward Chen with a specific kind of forward movement that Voss had learned to distinguish from normal movement, the kind that meant intent. Vin's voice hit the hall like a hammer on stone. Enough. One word. 3 centuries of authority in it. The room froze. Vin looked at Crick until he took a step back, looked at Soya until Soya's feathers calmed, looked around the hall 46 species that were very scared, very angry, and very confused, and then looked at Chen. Ambassador Chen, Vin said. You promised a full report. Yes, Chen said. You will give it now, completely. You will hold nothing back. The ancient eyes were steady. You understand the weight of what you are saying to this hall. You are saying that humanity did this, that humanity had an opportunity of such scale and did not inform its allies that for 12 days, and possibly longer, you allowed this council to plan, argue, and fear, while you held knowledge that was directly related to the survival of 9 billion people. I am not yet judging what you did or why, but I am telling you that the report must be complete. It will be, Chen said. Then speak. Chen looked at the hall at the 23 faces, at the attention of 46 species, all fixed on him. There was fear in it. There was anger in it. There was something that could become something else if he said it right. He had rehearsed this part too. He had rehearsed it alone in his room late at night, for months. 7 years ago, he said, one of our physicists found something in the debris of a Bret ship. He began with the debris. He told them about the Bret ship found drifting, cold in the Sarin system on the 4th year of the war. He told them how the Empire dismantled it and distributed the findings. He told them that every species looked at the weapons, hull, and shields, and that the human team took the engine. He told them about Dr. Rina Aku. She was 31 when she started this work. Chen said she had dedicated her career to studying the extreme cases of hyperspatial theory, quantum mechanics, that most engine engineers ignored because it didn't affect practical performance. She studied the Bret engine for 8 months. She tried to understand why it was faster than ours. She found the answer, and then she found something else. He explained the hyperspatial cut. He kept it in simple language because half the people in the hall were military and diplomatic staff, not physicists. He described it as Aku had described it to him. The first time she came to his office with her findings and an expression he first took for distress, before he realized it was the specific expression of a scientist who had found something that frightened and delighted her simultaneously. The Bret engine worked by cutting local space-time along quantum boundaries, like a cut of a seam on a piece of fabric. The ship passed through the cut. The cut closed. The released energy pushed the ship out the other side. Fast, precise, more powerful than any hyperspatial engine the Empire had built. Aku's question, Chen said, was, what happens if you cause the cut and prevent the backfiring? There were still 23 people in the hall. No movement, almost no sound. If the cut doesn't close, Chen continued, local space-time at the point of discharge doesn't return to the baseline level. It continues to cut. To expand, the quantum boundary continues to separate, and everything inside the boundary at that moment. He paused. Goes to where the cut goes, to the space between the folds, a place that is adjacent to our universe but is not part of it without a mechanism for return. Silence. Then Deepstone's voice, low and careful. Gone? Gone, Chen confirmed. Not destroyed, didn't explode, didn't shatter. All matter, all energy, everything is shifted into a space that our physics cannot observe or access. Energy conservation is maintained. Technically, nothing is lost. It is just somewhere we cannot reach. Soya let out a sound that wasn't quite a word. The device that opens this cut, Crick said slowly. You built one. We built 314 of them, Chen said. He told them about the 7 years. 218 people working on the project. Physicists, engineers, material specialists, engine technicians. They worked at a facility on the edge of human space in a system that had no strategic significance and attracted no tourists, and had no reason for anyone to ever travel there. That was why they chose it. The project had a budget line in the human military accounts called Deep Observation Infrastructure, which was the kind of name that sounded important enough that no one asked questions and boring enough that no one wanted to. The first 2 years were almost completely unsuccessful. Aku's theoretical model was solid. The problem was the trigger mechanism. To open a hyperspatial cut, intentionally, outside a moving propulsion system, you had to generate a specific quantum resonance at the precise frequency of the space-time boundary. In that place, the frequency was not universal. It varied depending on the local gravitational and electromagnetic environment, which meant each device had to read its local environment and calibrate the trigger in real time. We blew up 12 prototypes trying to get the calibration right. 3 explosions were big enough that the project team had to relocate facilities. Dr. Aku described the third explosion as instructive, Chen said. No one laughed, but Voss, watching from the side of the hall, saw several faces that weren't as tense as they were trying to be. The breakthrough happened in the 3rd year, Chen continued. A young engineer named Talio developed a passive resonance scanner that could calibrate the trigger by background readings without active scanning, which meant no energy signature, no detectable output, nothing any sensor could react to. The device went from something that announced itself to something invisible. He paused. That was when the project stopped being theoretical and became operational. 4 more years of work after that, refining the calibration, stabilizing the cut. Early tests gave cuts that lasted milliseconds, not long enough to shift a full ship. Getting the duration right took a year and a half. Miniaturizing the device to a size that a small stealth ship could carry and deploy without detection took another year. Testing first on uninhabited asteroids, then on decommissioned hulls drifting into empty space took the last 6 months. The last test 2 years ago shifted a decommissioned Imperial frigate. The ship was there, then it was gone. The sensors showed clear, empty space where a 2-meter warship had been. No debris, no thermal trail, no trace, Aku cried. Chen had read that in the report, and having read it, understood completely. General Harrow, Chen said, has been planning the deployment operation for 2 years. He told them about Harrow, 47 years old, a career officer, the type of man who ran his operational plans through so many simulations that by the time they were executed, reality felt like a rehearsal. Harrow was brought into the project 18 months after it started. When it became clear that the delivery problem, how to get 314 invisible devices into the operational space of an enemy fleet without detection by the enemy, was just as complex as the device itself. Harrow's answer was the cold approach. The Bret fleet used active sensor scans, powerful ones. They were constantly scanning for energy signatures, engine emissions, thermal radiation from weapons. They were very good at detecting threats. What they were not calibrated for, what no Imperial military sensor system had ever been calibrated for, was detecting cold objects without an energy signature. Rocks, ice, drifting debris, things that didn't work, didn't emit, didn't do anything that could be detected. Harrow's ships, while in delivery mode, were cold objects. Engines were completely shut down, reactors were in zero output mode. Life support systems ran on chemical reserves, not reactor power. All electronic equipment was in passive mode, recording but not transmitting, reading but not emitting. The ships drifted on pre-calculated trajectories like very complex rocks, while the human crews sat in partial darkness and cold and waited. It was uncomfortable. Chen said the crews were in suits. The temperature inside the ships dropped to 3 degrees above freezing. They ate cold rations, moved little, and waited. He told them how long. 12 days. The same 12 days the Empire gave humanity. While the Council argued in the war room, 300 ships with human crews drifted cold and silent into the operational space of the Bret fleet, deploying their devices one by one with robotic arms that extended only when the nearest Bret ship was at the maximum distance of passive sensor scanning, retracting immediately afterward. 314 devices placed over 12 days, one by one. Each placement was timed to the second. The Brets didn't detect a single one. Why didn't they detect the ships themselves? Asked Crick. He hadn't interrupted during the explanation. He stood very quietly, which for Crick meant something significant was happening behind the controlled exterior. The ships were cold, Chen said. Below ambient. Harrow's engineering team built insulated hull panels that absorbed heat. They didn't radiate it. To the Bret's sensor scanning, the ships looked like slightly cold spots of empty space. He paused. The Brets had never encountered an enemy that didn't want to be detected so badly that it would sit at 3 degrees above freezing for 12 days. They didn't design their systems to search for something like that. He told them about the activation. At 6 hours on the 12th day, on General Harrow's signal, 314 devices received a simultaneous command to activate. The command was sent via a quantum entanglement channel instant transmission. No electromagnetic signature, nothing to detect or intercept. Harrow sent the signal from a ship that was still cold, still drifting, still invisible. 314 triggers activated within 4 milliseconds of each other. 314 hyperspatial cuts opened in the space occupied by the Bret fleet. Cuts, calibrated to their local environments, began to expand not explosively, not with any visible drama of a weapons blast. Quietly, smoothly, like a cut opens when you pull a thread. The quantum boundaries around each device spread outward, intersecting with each other, overlapping. And the combined effect was a cascading cut that spread through the formation faster than any ship could react. There was no alarm they could raise, no evasion maneuver. The cut was not a projectile approaching from any direction. It was a change in the fundamental nature of space they occupied. 8,000 warships didn't explode. They didn't burn. They didn't even have time to realize what was happening. They simply ceased to exist in this universe. The entire process took 11 seconds. Chen said the last part quietly, and when he finished, it was so quiet in the hall that the low hum of the atmospheric systems was the loudest sound in the room. Crick spoke first. His voice was so controlled it became flat. The voice of a man who had decided to be precise because precision was the only alternative to something much less professional. Why didn't you tell us? It wasn't a simple question. It had layers. Voss heard them all. Why didn't you tell us you were building this? Why didn't you tell us you had it when it was ready? Why didn't you tell us before the 12th day, before the council spent days arguing, before 9 billion people on Kalos sat 9 days away from destruction while you sat in the back corner with this in your pocket? Because we didn't know if it would work, Chen said. Not until it did. You tested it on a decommissioned hull in empty space, Crick said. One ship, controlled conditions, known environment. No active enemy systems trying to detect the device or disrupt the trigger. The gap between one ship in a test and 8,000 active warships in battle formation, that is not a small gap. He looked straight at Crick. If we had told the Council about this project, the Council would have made it a joint project. Multiple species, multiple levels of security, multiple points of possible information leakage. The Brets do not negotiate and do not show mercy, but they do have intelligence capabilities. They have repeatedly demonstrated this. He paused. A joint project would have been known to the Brets within a year, and then we would have had nothing left. Crick said nothing. Secrecy was not about trust, Chen continued. We trust this council. We have fought 11 years side by side with every species in this room. Secrecy was about operational security and the real possibility that it would fail. And we didn't want to destroy the council's confidence in human capabilities based on a failed experiment. He looked around the room. If Harrow's operation had failed today, if the devices didn't activate, or the Brets had detected the ships, or the cut hadn't spread at scale, then after 12 days you would have moved your fleets to Kalos. And we would never have mentioned it again, because a failed secret is better than a failed hope. The room absorbed it. Deepstone looked at Chen with an expression that had evolved over the last hour. The unnamed expression from the earlier moment had changed to something Voss was beginning to recognize. It wasn't anger, it wasn't fear anymore. It was the expression of a person recalibrating. You carried this alone, Deepstone said. 7 years, knowing it might not work, knowing that if it worked, this conversation would happen. Yes, Chen said. And you chose to use it for Kalos, Deepstone said. Not for your own territory, not for a human world. You used it here for the whole empire, and accepted that you would have to explain yourself later. Chen looked at the Garen. We are members of this empire, he said. Kalos is our city too. The room went quiet again, but it was a different quiet than before. Before, it was a silence of shock. Now it was the silence of a room that had started to think, not react. Soya's feathers calmed. They were no longer flat, no longer puffed up, just settled. The way feathers settle when a sharp moment has passed and a longer, more complex process has begun. She looked at her hands, then she looked up. How many such devices do you have left? She asked. Chen looked at her. It was the exact question that needed to be asked. And he told them, Part 4 is ready. I've laid it all out. Dr. Aku's discovery, 7 years of cold, secret work, General Harrow's invisible fleet drifting in enemy space, and 11 seconds that changed the war, and now Soya has asked the question that opens everything. Chen looked at Soya for a moment before answering. We deployed 314 devices, he said. In total, we produced 357. 43 are in secure storage on a human ship in this system. He let that sink in. We also have full production blueprints, manufacturing equipment, and the team that built them. At our current production speed, we can build approximately 30 devices a month. The room calculated. The room calculated quickly because 46 species with a combined millennium of military experience all understood production capacities and deployment timelines. And the math gave the same answer. No matter who performed it, humanity could do it again. Humanity could do it whenever it wanted, against any target it wanted, given enough preparation time. They hadn't fired a single-use weapon. They had opened a factory. The room split along a fault line. It wasn't a clean crack of a simple argument. It was the kind of crack that ran through the middle of existing alliances, crossing interspecies lines, separating delegations that had agreed on everything else for the last 11 years. Over the course of about 4 minutes, the hall reorganized along a new axis that had nothing to do with the Brets and everything to do with what would come next. On one side, fear. The Polari delegation, Soya and her 2 senior advisors, moved together with a density that Voss recognized as the representation of a species under threat. The Helter delegates became very quiet. Their bioluminescence switched to a clarity Voss associated with deep discomfort. 4 representatives of smaller species talked rapidly to each other in their own languages, not bothering with imperial standard. One of them, the Shinhari delegate, a small creature with large eyes and an extremely expressive face, looked at Chen with an expression that wasn't hostile, but wasn't comfortable. It was the expression of a person standing next to something they couldn't fully see and didn't fully understand. On the other side, something that moved in the direction of another feeling, not comfort. Exactly. But the direction of movement was toward it. Deepstone didn't move. The Garen block sat in their corner as always, massive and quiet, watching. 3 of the 6 Garen representatives looked at Chen. The other 3 looked at the empty space on the display where the Bret fleet used to be. Crick still stood at the map platform with the flat, controlled facial expression he used when he was thinking very hard, and didn't want anyone to see the thought process. Chancellor Vin hadn't spoken since he gave Chen permission to address the hall. Soya spoke first from the fear side of the fault line. "I want to be clear. I am grateful," she said. Her voice had the quality of a person choosing every word with caution, aware that words would matter later in ways she couldn't fully predict. "Kalos is alive. 140 systems cannot be returned, but Kalos is alive, and that has huge meaning for this council, and for the 9 billion people who will wake up tomorrow not knowing what nearly happened to them." She paused. "But I am obligated to say what I am thinking. Everyone in this room is aware. What we have just been told is that one species, one member of this empire, a member that joined 9 years ago, a member whose military participation in the war was valuable but not outstanding, was secretly developing a weapon that makes every other weapon in the known galaxy irrelevant." She looked at Chen. "I am not questioning your intentions today. I am questioning the existence of a situation in which your intentions are the only thing standing between this capability and its application against someone else." It was a fair statement. Voss knew this would happen. Chen knew this would happen. They had discussed it long evenings before the 12th day in Chen's office on Virat Prime, going through every version of every argument. Soya continued. "The Brets were our enemies. Today your intentions and ours were aligned. But a weapon without a countermeasure and without an equivalent in any other species' arsenal is not a weapon, it is a permanent imbalance. And permanent imbalances do not stay stable." "She is right," said the Shinhari delegate in Imperial Standard. "This time she is right, and every species in this room knows it." Several voices agreed. Then Deepstone spoke. The Garen representative's voice was always the same, low, grinding, slow. Deepstone didn't adjust volume for emphasis. Emphasis came from the weight of the words and the silence around them. "I have a different concern," Deepstone said, "and my concern goes in a different direction." The room paid attention to the Garen. "The Brets came from the outer darkness and burned 140 of our systems," Deepstone said. "They killed billions of our people. They destroyed stations and planets and the accumulated labor of 3,000 years of civilization. For 11 years, the combined military force of 46 species could not stop them." The massive head of Deepstone turned slowly across the room. "Today, one species with 218 scientists and one determined general stopped them. Today, 9 billion people on Kalos are alive. Today, the war ends. Not because 46 species finally found a defense, a tactic, or a counter-weapon, but because one species, the youngest in this empire, the one we invited 9 years ago with polite disapproval, found an answer that none of us were looking for. The grinding voice paused. My concern is not that humanity has such a capability. My concern is what it says about us that we didn't find it in the first place. And my second concern is what will happen to all of us if we respond to the people who saved 9 billion lives by treating them as a threat. The fault line shuddered. Some of the smaller species that had been nodding in agreement with Soya were now not nodding. Crick turned away from the map platform. He looked at Deepstone. Then he looked at Chen. The Zarathians lost 11 systems, Crick said. His voice was still flat, controlled. My family was from the 7th. I was at the academy when it burned. I have fought in this war for 10 years. He stopped, started again. I have also been in this hall for 4 days, watching 46 species argue in circles about how to protect 9 billion people, and none of us had an answer. He looked at Chen with a long, level moment. You had an answer, and you used it. He paused. I am not glad you kept it secret. I want to be honest about that. It is an uncomfortable feeling to know that something like this existed without our knowledge. But I also know that if you had brought this to this council 3 years ago when it was ready, the security concerns, Soya's concerns, the Helter concerns, and my own concerns would have delayed it for months while we argued about management and oversight and joint control. And in those months, more systems would have burned. He paused again. I don't know what the right answer is. I know Kalos is alive, and the Bret fleet is gone, and I know who did it. The room sat with that. News from the front arrived 40 minutes later. A communications officer entered with a message on a secure tablet and brought it directly to Chancellor Vin. Vin read it. Then Vin read it again. Then Vin stood, which Voss hadn't seen the Chancellor do without prompting in 6 years of council meetings. The second fleet of the Bret Collective, Vin said, has stopped moving. The room absorbed it. The Brets had a second fleet, smaller approximately 2,000 ships, positioned as a reserve on the outer edge of Imperial territory. It was a secondary concern during the crisis, but it was there. A slow threat in the background of all planning. It stopped. Total halt, 0 movement, 0 progress, 0 change in formation. It is sitting in open space and not moving. They received word of the first fleet, Crick said immediately. They know the main force is gone. There is more, Vin said. The ancient voice had a quality Voss had never heard before, something close to wonder. With the Bret Collective, a signal was received on standard diplomatic frequencies. Total silence. This is the first message they have ever sent in 11 years. Vin said it contained 2 words. The Chancellor looked around the room. The words are, "We surrender." The session that followed lasted 9 hours. Voss sat through the whole time. Her coffee had gone cold. She drank it anyway. The surrender signal from the Brets was real, verified by 3 independent translation systems and confirmed by the continued stillness of the second fleet. 46 species processed the end of an 1-1-year war in 46 different ways, some of which were loud, some of which were very personal, and some of which would manifest fully over years. Delegates, who 90 minutes ago were arguing about human capabilities, were crying at the news of the ceasefire. The delegate of Sari, with the small eyes and the extremely expressive face, sat in his chair and made a sound that Voss finally understood as laughter, the involuntary kind that arises when something is too big to digest and finds whatever exit it can. The question of management didn't disappear. It was raised 4 more times during the 9 hours by 4 different species representatives. How would human capability be controlled? What were the conditions of use? What would stop a future human government with different values or intentions from turning it on an ally? Chen answered every time. He answered patiently and fully, and without defensiveness. He had prepared for this too. The answers weren't simple. The oversight structure they developed over 9 hours wasn't perfect. No structure developed over 9 hours is ever perfect. It would be revised, argued over for years. There would be formal treaty sessions and independent review bodies, and a massive amount of paperwork. Chen accepted it all. He accepted it because it was reasonable and because the alternative lack of structure, lack of oversight, 46 species quietly fearing the humans in the back corner was not a foundation for anything. Once, around the 6th hour of the session, the Helter delegate asked if the technology could be shared. Could other species build these devices? Chen looked at the delegate for a moment. Then he looked at Vin. Production blueprints and the underlying physics will be transferred to the Imperial Joint Scientific Archive today, he said. Every species in this room will have access to the full Aku research tomorrow morning. The Helter delegate blinked. You are giving it away? We are sharing, Chen said. There is a difference. We didn't build this to have power over anyone. We built this to stop the Brets. A pause. The research belongs to the galaxy. Dr. Aku would have said the same. She already had. At the end of the 9 hours, Chancellor Vin declared a break. Voss left the hall and found a quiet corridor and stood in it for a while, doing nothing. Her feet were tired. Her eyes were tired. She had been awake for about 30 hours. She thought about what was true now that wasn't true 30 hours ago. The Bret fleet was gone. The war was over. The Bret Collective. 11 years of burning, murdering, and steady advancement like a tide through everything the Empire had built, had sent 2 words over a diplomatic channel: we surrender. She had been unable to imagine the end of the war for so long that she had to constantly remind herself that it was actually over. It sat in her consciousness like a large piece of furniture sits in a room that was previously empty, real, and solid, but requiring adjustment every time you moved around it. She thought about Dr. Rina Aku, whom she had never met, who was currently on a human research ship 3 light-years away, and whose results had been transmitted via a narrow-beam signal 6 hours ago. She thought about Aku's expression when the message arrived. She thought about General Harrow, whose ships were now moving with engines on and lights on, visible and warm, heading home at full speed after 12 days of cold, darkness, and silence. She thought about the 218 people who spent 7 years in a system no one cared about, enduring failures and trying again. And enduring failures in different ways and trying again. And who weren't in this room today and likely wouldn't be in any room where the history of this day was formally recorded, because that's how big events work. The people who made the thing are rarely the people in the photograph. She thought about what came next. There was a lot of what came next. There would be negotiations with the Brets, which would be strange because the Brets had never negotiated before and no one knew what that looked like. There would be long work on the oversight system, which would take months of meetings in this very building. There would be the long reconstruction of 140 systems, which would take generations. There would be the longer, quieter work of 46 species, adjusting to a new understanding of where humanity fit in the order of things. A young species, the latecomers, the ones who sat in the back corner and spoke little. Voss leaned against the corridor wall and looked at the high stone ceiling. Zarathian architecture, built to last centuries, built to make you feel the weight of history in the walls. She thought about the weight of tomorrow. Footsteps. Chen walked down the corridor with 2 fresh cups of terrible coffee. He offered her one. She took it. They stood in silence in the corridor for a while, not talking, which was something they had learned over years of working together in such buildings. The value of silence that didn't need to be filled. Aku wants to come here, Chen said in the end. She wants to personally present the full research to the Joint Scientific Archive. She should. It's hers, Voss said. She's also 38, and she spent 7 years at that facility and never attended a council meeting. Chen paused slightly. She asked me if the coffee here is any good. Tell her no, Voss said. Tell her to bring her own. Then Chen smiled. This time, a real one. One that came from somewhere genuine, and not somewhere diplomatic. Outside, through the window at the end of the corridor, the sky of Verat Prime was dark, full night. 3 moons were visible, and the stars were bright and clear. That's what stars look like on a world without light pollution in the immediate vicinity, which usually isn't the case for a war council building. Voss looked at the stars for a while. Out there, in one particular patch of space that the scouts had mapped and marked with a scout beacon for future scientific study, there was clean, empty nothingness where 8,000 warships had been. Somewhere out there, a young Bret officer on a command ship of the Second Fleet was looking at a red sensor signal showing that his entire main force had simply vanished, and he was understanding what that meant for the first time. Somewhere out there, on Kalos, 9 billion people were spending their evening, not knowing what nearly happened to them. And somewhere out there, somewhere between here and human space, a ship with cold, panel-covered hulls and a tired crew was moving home at full speed after 12 days of cold, darkness, and silence. And on its bridge, a general named Harrow was likely sitting in his chair, doing what he always did after a mission, calculating the numbers, checking the math, making sure that what happened was what he had planned. The math turned out to be correct. Voss drank her terrible coffee and looked at the stars and thought that sometimes that's enough. You did the work. You calculated the numbers. You sat cold and invisible in the dark for days while the galaxy held its breath. And then you did what everyone else had decided was impossible. The stars were bright and clear, and the war was over. And somewhere, in the Empire's joint scientific archive, a file was being uploaded with the name of a researcher, the physicist Dr. Rina Aku, a date, and a title. And everyone who read it, from this day on, would learn what a human physicist found in the wreckage of a Bret ship, and what she asked next, and what the answer turned out to be. The universe is full of doors. Humanity had just found another one.